So what I want to do for you right now is I want to break down what is currently the pDNA. You need to know in advance that when we first created the photographer DNA, the categories that we had, it was a much longer test, and I was trying to measure for everything and everything, anything and everything. And thankfully, I had a professional statistician help me look through all the data as people were taking it around the round one, and it turned out we got some pretty good data, but it also turned out that you could boil down what we were really measuring to about 14 specific metrics that were really critical to identify as you're identifying kind of your own strengths as a professional photographer. And that's what I want to go over right now. So these are the 14 characteristics that I think are most important in identifying how you can flourish as a professional photographer. The first one seems pretty obvious, is experience. And in all of these categories, you're going to you want to kind of measure, are you in a low, medium, or high place with any of these categories. So experience is the easiest one to measure, and it's also the one that's most hopeful if you're in the low category. Experience as a professional in any craft requires some effort. So if you're going to consider where you're at and what you need to do about where you're at, figuring out your experience matters. Have you been at this thing for very long? Have you logged 100,000 shutters? Can you shoot in manual and have your camera do what you want it to do? If we can find that out pretty quickly with just a couple questions, and you probably know the answer to that already, although some of you think you're way further along than you really are, and others of you think that you're way further behind than you really are. And neither of those conversations are very resourceful. What's more resourceful is where are you actually at, which is what we're trying to measure when we ask the question, what's your experience? The next two categories that we measure is self-starter and program starter. These are questions around how do you actually learn? And it turns out people learn differently. So for example, some people are self-feeders or self-learners, and they don't need a whole lot of input or structure. They can just show up in the library, get the content they need, and they got it. And that's pretty much all that's required. For other people, like myself, I tend to need programs. I need things, structure, tell me what to do now, and then tell me what to do after I've done that. And I can work pretty hard in that kind of a program. That's how I've done things like run a marathon or started a business. When you have those things in place and you have a program, for me that's helpful. For other people, programs can feel stifling. Can you imagine how if you had that information on how you best learn, how that could inform the investments you make around your professional development? It certainly could. And that's what I wanted to measure with these two things. The fourth factor that I want to measure is confidence. Turns out that confidence is a significant asset if you can get it. And it's also attainable. Some people think you're either confident or not confident. I don't buy that. In fact, I would argue that confidence is the kind of thing that you earn. The more you believe in what you're up to, the greater the confidence will show up. And you want to measure where you currently stand, low, medium, or high in that category. This fifth one is really interesting. It's called risk tolerance. And risk tolerance is a category that I think honestly is misunderstood. When you think of risk tolerance, you might think of people who they make a big gamble in Las Vegas or roll the dice in some direction. And in my experience, folks who consistently do well in taking risks, meaning they get a big return for what seems like a big risk, tend to be folks they're almost like Yoda-like in that they can picture in advance what the return on the risk is, and they have a confidence that the risk will pay out. And they seem to be able to do that at a faster pace than normal people. So you can begin to see how some of these things correlate, like confidence with risk. The more confident you are, in a sense, true confidence, the more risk you'll be able to take. Now, some people, they're foolish. They think they need to take big risks to have a shot. And I would encourage, if you don't have a high risk tolerance, know where you stand so you make risks that are commensurate with where you're at currently and grow in that capacity. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th category that I measure is your need for control. And this is a really funny one when it comes to photographers, because you hear the conversations all the time. People don't want to outsource, for example, because they don't want to release control to a company outside of your, ability to manipulate it all. And as a result, they find themselves spending all of their energy trying to control every aspect of their business, and they can't find the time to get ahead. And that there's no way you can scale if you have to control everything. So knowing if you have a high need for control, a medium need for control, or a low need for control can inform how you should be building out your business. And you might even see some opportunities to adjust how you're approaching things to maybe expand in your ability to control the right things and leave other things to be out of your control. This next category is an interesting one for me. I'm a hyper extrovert, and I have more of a need for collaboration than I do for control. I find that if I can find good business partners that will work with me and in concert with my vision for my business, I tend to get a better result. So for me, my strength as a collaborator has really served me, and my low need for control in certain categories has also served me. Now, if you find yourself in a high need for control and a low need for collaboration, you might have to work a little harder in those categories to get a different result. These next two are really closely aligned. It's how you view yourself, your identification. Do you view yourself primarily as an artist, or do you view yourself primarily as an entrepreneur? And you can imagine, when you think about those two things juxtaposed, some people really believe that, gosh, all photographers must think of themselves the same way that I think of myself. And that's just not true. Some photographers strictly see themselves as artists, and they really struggle with the business side. That's the cliche, right? Or they're entrepreneurs, and they're not really committed to the craft. And those are, I think, caricatures of reality. The truth is, you probably land somewhere on a gradual scale in both categories. A little bit artist, a little bit entrepreneur. Can you see, if you knew where you actually stood, how that could benefit you in the way you strategize the building of your business? That's what these are measuring for. Then there's attractiveness. This one's really funny, because I'm basically saying, how winsome are you to your potential clients? If people like to work with people that they like, and if you're not likable, you need to increase your likability factor. But it's probably helpful to find out what your starting point is before you know where you're going. And we can all think of people who are super likable in our industry, and that's an asset that they can count on. It's really helpful to know where you stand with that. This next one, I coined the phrase being a grumpy in this industry, and I've gotten in a lot of trouble for it. But the reality is, the attitude of grumpiness is real. And you know it, I know it, and it will either help your business or hurt your business. Knowing where you stand as a grumpy, because everyone has a little grumpy in them, is really, really important. The last three are striking to me on a couple fronts. One is where you get your creativity from. That's my dog Zoe. Do you get your creativity from others, or do you get your creativity from yourself? This relates a little bit to introvert-extrovertness, but some people find that they can go out and collect good stuff and create from it. Other people find themselves digging deep and creating out of that. I would argue that there's probably more resource from creating from outside than inside, but that's just one perspective. You may find that one of your strengths is you have a deep well of creativity, and you can lean on that. And finally, this last category of self-promotion, this is related primarily to business, especially if your business is yourname.com. It's really tough to make it in this business, in any business really, if you're not willing to believe in your business to the point where you're willing to promote it. And that can rub up against other things like your artistic identification, for example, and you can actually see how a lot of these things relate by now. But these 14 categories, these metrics, if you can have a sense of where you stand in each of them, what it does is it gives you a current reality perspective that you can leap out from. And I promise you, you can make progress. It's one of the reasons why I encourage people to consider these categories at least once a year. Where do I stand today? Because they change. A year ago, I was in a different place than I am now. And I suspect you are too as you grow in your business.